This is question number 12 of homework 9. The graph to the right shows the rightward shift of the demand curve for reserves from R subscript 1 superscript D to R subscript 2 to superscript D that moves the equilibrium from point 1 to point 2 where the federal funds rate equals the discount rate according to this graph. So here, well, we know the demand and the supplies for market reserves. The demand curve is kind of downward sloping, and then it has a horizontal part, which is not drawn in this chart. And the supply curve is vertical, and then you have the horizontal part. The horizontal part here refers to the discount rate, which is the interest rate charged by the Fed when banks borrow from the Fed. So if the demand curve shifts to the right, the initial equilibrium is at point 1 here, and then with the right shift of the demand curve, the new equilibrium is at point 2. So let's check each of these 4 choices here. A, borrowed reserves are equal to the distance between B and C. So what is borrowed reserves? Basically, this is the reserves generated by borrowing from the Fed. And this vertical part refers to the non-borrowed reserves. So that's generated by the open market purchases. And then if the federal funds rate hits the discount rate, then banks in theory will be indifferent between borrowing from each other through the federal funds market or from the Fed. So that's the discount rate. So that means from this point, the vertical part to any point on the horizontal portion of the supply curve, that stands for the borrowed reserves. So that means the horizontal distance between 1 and 2, that's basically the borrowed reserves. And if you look down, that's basically the distance between B and C. So as we said, the distance between A and B, that's the non-borrowed reserves through the open market purchases. So borrowed reserves are equal to the distance between B and C. As we just explained, this is actually correct. But if we check all these answers, we can see that we have this D here. All of the above are correct. So even though A is correct, that doesn't mean that's the correct choice. Because if the other two are also correct, then we should choose D. There's only one choice for the multiple choice questions. Just keep that in mind. So B, non-borrowed reserves are equal to the distance between A and B. Actually, that's also correct, as we just explained. C, the federal funds rate cannot rise above ID, I subscript D. That is the discount rate, which is the horizontal portion of the supply curve. And that's also correct because that, of course, we actually have some articles that were assigned for chapter 18, which were talking about the so-called stigma effect associated with discount window borrowing. But in practice, the federal funds rate may rise above the discount rate because of the stigma attached to the discount borrowing. But in theory, that's the federal funds rate in general is either equal to or below the discount rate, and the reason simply being that the cost of the borrowing for the banks. If the federal funds rate rise above the discount rate, then the banks could simply save the cost by borrowing from the Fed. rather than borrowing from each other. So that's why in theory the federal funds rate cannot rise above ID. So this is also correct. So that means all of the above are correct. So we should choose this D here.